Are you struggling to come up with original content week in and week out? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients, let them talk about what they care about most, and never run out of content ideas again. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Michael Barber. He is SVP and Chief Creative Officer at Godfrey. Michael, how you doing today, man?
I'm well, Logan. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on. You guys have been doing some great things. Michael, I noticed Godfrey was on the Chief Marketer Top 200. You yourself were named as one of the Fearless 50 by Marketo. And so we're going to be talking about some things that I think you're going to have a great perspective based on, what you and your team are up to these days. But let's start there. Let's have a little bit of background. Tell listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey in marketing, Michael, and what you and the team at Godfrey are up to, man.
Absolutely. So I'm lucky enough to be a product of some incredible teachers. I came out of school and worked for a gentleman by the name of Jay Baer, which I'm sure anybody that's listening to this podcast, if you have been in marketing for the last 20 years, would recognize that name. One of the forefront digital thought leaders in our space, and certainly a New York Times bestselling author across 4 books, and was lucky enough to be in 4 agencies over the course of my career before I stepped out and started my own with some really incredible teachers and thought leaders in those spaces. Stepped away to start my own company. And late last year, that company was acquired and I joined the team at Godfrey. Godfrey is a team of 91 individuals championing the world-changing changes that B2B industrial manufacturers are creating across our space. And I'm lucky enough to have an incredible team that gets to win those types of awards, like being a part of the Chief Martech Top 200, as well as lucky enough to have been nominated by them for Marketo 50 and given that honor by the Marketo team.
That's very cool to hear some of your journey. Definitely a lot of listeners familiar with Jay, that's for sure. Didn't even know about that connection. So I'm enjoying hearing that a little bit. So Michael, we're going to be talking about some specific things that marketers need to be thinking about when it comes to the use of email today. We're going to be talking about authentication, personalization, and measurement. But before we go there, I think it's worth pausing and talking a little bit about the state of email. It's one of those channels that has seen a lot of changes over the years. So I would love for you to kind of hit pause, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing, you and your team, as you look at an email channel, both, for your agency and for your clients here lately.
Yeah, we have seen as what I would easily call an email renaissance. If you think back over the past, or sort of since the last 20, 25 years since we really started to see consumers and businesses alike adopt email, that date being somewhere around the 1996, 1997 date period, we have seen this channel come to the forefront of the marketing tactic that everybody needed to have in their set of tools and in their tactics. And then we saw it sort of wax and wane away over the past decade or so as we saw marketers focus on mobile and focus on social and content marketing. And I'm certainly not taking away the focus, or don't want to take away the focus and the value that those channels and those tactics bring to our marketing mix. But what we're seeing as a team and what we've seen in the industry over the last 3 or 4 years is a resurgence of this channel. And this is both in the consumer marketplace as well as from a B2B perspective. When we look across just the impact that email has at a sheer numbers perspective, we're talking about billions of people that are connected. If you think of email The best way to think of email, and often how I posit it to our clients, it is the original social media network. You take the scope of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and the like, and pull those together, and you're still just scratching the surface of the amount of email, amount of people that are connected via email. The other thing we know on that sort of consumer behavior line is that people are spending more time in this channel, not less, comparatively to what we're seeing in say, social. 17% increase in year over year in the average number of hours that people are spending within checking their email each week. We are seeing, when we look at the research globally, not just here in the US, but outside within the EU, within EMEA and other countries, except for China and some Asia Pac countries, this is the channel where consumers tell us that they want to receive information. And then the other big impact for us as marketers is not to just understand where people want to receive our messages, but also the impact that they have on our organizations. And when we look across our clients as well as outside of our clients' industries, we continue to see email ranked as the number one channel for return on investment for organizations. And I think the last big thing to think about, especially if you are like me, what I like to call sort of an oldie but a goodie in this industry, is that this particular channel used to be just a relationship with a subscriber, right? You had, if you were subscribed, you were a subscriber. If you weren't, you'd opted out, or a non-subscriber, if you will. The relationship with a subscriber is not just about being in their inbox. It's also because we've integrated all of these channels that we're touching consumers in and people in, where the email address becomes a foundation for how we build data around our customers. It also becomes a way that we can target them well outside the inbox and based on the behaviors that they're having in the inbox. So when I talk of, if we think about why email is something I love to continue to talk about, even though I've been in this channel for 15, 16 years at this point, it's because people still love it, normal human beings. It's because it generates decent, if not the best ROI for our organizations. And number three, because that relationship with a subscriber is so much more than simply a conversation in their inbox these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you point to some very telling stats. I like the way you describe it as a renaissance of email. I can definitely identify with what you're talking about there, Michael. So with all of that being said, the importance of email still as not the only channel, but a very crucial channel to our marketing efforts. Let's talk about some things that marketers need to be thinking about. And as you and I were chatting a little bit offline, you mentioned authentication is a key that cannot be skipped when it comes to your email marketing approach, right?
Yeah, no, anything that you do as an email marketer is all if you get into the inbox, right? All the planning that we do, all the preparation, all the strategy, and the tactical implementation of what we do inside the inbox is all for naught if you don't actually get delivered. What we know is that the best estimates say that deliverability across the globe is somewhere between about 82 to 86%, depending upon which particular internet service provider we're talking about. And when I say internet service provider, I'm talking Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, Barracuda, those people that control our relationships into the inbox. And what we often see with brands is they neglect this. This is just a tried and true thing that just has to be done correctly and managed and monitored. Because if we're not actually getting into the inbox, we are wasting an abundant amount of time on concepting our campaigns, on developing them, designing them, putting them into automation flows, measuring results on them. And if we're not at the top level figuring out if we're actually getting delivered and how we're being delivered, that's the first step we've got to get right and always monitor to make sure we've always got the ability to get into the inbox with the content that we have that we're trying to get our consumers to take a look at.
Absolutely. All of that work and all of that effort and money spent in building these campaigns is really all for naught if it's not actually getting there. So what are some of the authentication steps that folks are forgetting to take that you find, Michael, with some of your clients?
Yeah, there's a couple key ones. So keep in mind with authentication, there's any number of what we call DNS records. These are text records or strings that you put on your domain name servers, or DNS as that stands for. The top ones at a minimum that every brand, regardless of B2B or not, needs to be leveraging is the SPF and the DKIM records. Those are sender policy framework and domain keys identified mail. Those are considered the gold standards for deliverability within authentication. If you are a high volume sender, then the other one you've got to make sure you've got correct is your DMARC policy. Those are the three that you've got to be always focused on. There are some others depending upon some nuances to your campaigns that Any good email strategist will be able to tell you, but SPF, DKIM, and DMARC are the three that I would be initially focused on and always focused on as you look across your email campaigns.
All right, today's growth story is about search engine marketing. Clear Company is an HR tech company that was doing a lot of things right. Their messaging was clear, their product produced incredible results, but they were struggling to drive qualified traffic to their website. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first 12 months of working with Directive, Clear Company was able to increase their qualified lead volume by 157%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
So, Michael, the second topic that we mentioned that we're going to be touching on is personalization. I like the way that you broke it down into it. Personalization really needs to hit all three tick marks here: timely, targeted, and relevant. Tell me a little bit about how you think about personalization when it comes to this email channel for yourselves and for your clients at Godfrey.
For sure. So the biggest single reason when we talk to clients about why it's important to take the time to think about segmentation is because when you look at the research, not only within our individual clients, but also when you look at the research in the industry, comparably to what you drive with a one-size-fits-all campaign, comparatively to those that have had some sort of segmentation, is usually about double when you are segmenting. So let's take just a really quick slice of a really quick view into a research study that was published a few months ago around this idea of the all customers bucketed up and sending one campaign comparatively to personalization or segmenting those customers based on certain behaviors. We've seen multiple studies that say or suggest anywhere from a 50% to 100% increase in return on investment based on simply segmenting users based on some sort of personalization aspect. And that can be any number of things like first name personalization or time of day personalization, or things like behavioral or lifestyle. There's about 30 or 40 different segmentation pillars that are out there that allow us to do different types of a segmentation across our lists. It's just about identifying what ones can we do effectively based on clean data that we have inside our CRM systems, and what ones do we want to work towards, or what ones can we not do because of the fact that we don't have the best data to serve the content needs that we're looking from a segmentation perspective.
Yeah. Maybe it's just me, Michael, but I see a lot of folks that stop at that segmentation and personalization based on maybe title, maybe even just, first name personalization. As you mentioned, there are 30 plus that are, there's more than that we could personalize on, but kind of pillars of personalization, as you put it. Are there some within that batch that you see rise to the top as one being fairly easy to execute on and driving a big difference in the engagement and other metrics quantitatively in email campaigns? What are some of the others beyond those first kind of table stakes of personalization that you think marketers should be thinking about to take it to that next level of, step number 2?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's two ways of describing this related to B2B is buyer stage or life cycle status, right? So SQL, MQL, those sorts of qualifying lead groups, if you will. What stage of the journey are they in? That sometimes sounds like table stakes, but getting those segmentation, those people into those appropriate buckets is really, really hard to define what those are for many organizations. So beyond just those initial table stakes, that's probably the next one I would tell you. The one that we've seen have the most impact, though, is well outside this idea of what stage of the buying cycle are you in, and largely in what are the benefits that you're looking for with this specific product or this specific organization. And this gets back to what you must do first before you start to segment your audiences, and that is really start to develop what do your personas look like. And this can be 5 personas. It could be 100, depending upon the type of organization, if not 1,000, depending upon the scale of the organization, the types of products and services that organization is selling. But we see huge impact within the B2B lens with the benefits sought. If you can target users by what makes them tick, what are they looking for from your organization, that is often something that's well outside the table stakes set of pillars that can be really hard to get at, but provides a ton of value when you start to speak to people about what are the benefits that you're looking for from us for our product or service that we may be trying to drop into your inbox.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see where the impact of that makes a lot of sense in B2B, especially as you move up into more complex enterprise sales. It's not, one feature, one benefit, and this is what we do. There are a number of different benefits and different benefits for different stakeholders, depending on, a number of factors. So if you can hone in on which those are and personalize based on those, I can only imagine that you're going to reap the benefits. But usually where there's benefits to be had, there's some work to be done. So I think you set the stage there pretty well, Michael. So the last thing we're going to talk about here today is being a little bit more holistic in your measurement of email campaigns. Tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing there and what you think marketers need to be thinking about in this last of 3 key elements to think about in their email marketing, Michael.
Yeah, I would love to see us all as an industry stop placing as much value on what I call vanity metrics. And I'm sure this is a term you've heard used in the podcast for years at this point. Is when we think of email and we think of vanity metrics, those metrics that are just table stakes at this point, we're talking about deliverability, open rate, click to open rate, click through rate, those sorts of table stakes metrics that we often see. And too often, we're also shooting for averages. So what I would encourage us as really smart B2B marketers, if we could take a second to understand that there is literally a plethora of additional metrics that can improve the impact of what email is doing for our organization, and 2, to shoot beyond averages. So let's look first at sort of some other metrics that we can think about as email marketers. There is a great post by our friends over at Litmus. And if you're not familiar with Litmus, they do 2 things for you. Well, I don't want this to be a pitch for Litmus, but Litmus helps you understand what your email campaigns look like and how they perform in the inbox. They're a tool we utilize for our email campaigns for our clients day in, day out. They had this great blog post about a year ago by one of their head of research, Chad White, and he talked about this matrix around email marketing and how to determine different metrics that are both short-term, long-term, as well as the impact they have on direct business and the indirect impact that they can have on your business. So let's just look at a slice of other metrics that we can look at when we think of direct business impact. When we think of short-term direct business impact, we can think of what's the duration of the engagement of someone coming from an email campaign on our website. What's their click and click-through rate? What's their post-click behavior? Do they browse? Do they put things in carts? What do they do? And then the email campaign revenue and profit from that actual campaign. So those are sort of some things you can think of from a short-term perspective. Let's say we take that same lens of looking at direct business impact and we think about long-term impact that an email campaign can have or an email channel can have on our organization. And you can think of metrics like how much does the email program generate in revenue and profit? What is the subscriber lifetime value? What's the entire email program's return on investment, or what impact does it have on our lead pipeline value? So as you think about getting beyond just deliverability, open rate, click-through rate, click to open rate, there's a plethora of additional metrics that can really help derive and also understand the impact that email has on our organizations, both short-term and long-term. The last thing I'll say about that is shooting beyond averages. We have this tendency in marketing to go, well, we made the average, so we're good. And sometimes I really struggle with that rationale, because often when you're shooting for averages, you're missing what we could be doing better. What's the impact that we could be having beyond those averages? And we get hung up on those averages. And I would love to see us go, you know what? We are shooting for a certain percentage in our organization because we know we can get there, and elevating that bar. Depending upon the investment of time and resources that we're putting in the channel, elevating that bar over the course of a quarterly basis or an annual basis. So I would just encourage us to think more holistically on what sort of campaign impact, what impacts email campaigns can have in your organization, and to stop shooting for industry averages. Shoot for what works for your organization and do your best to improve from there.
Mm-hmm. I love the idea of that grid. We're going to find the link to that Litmus post and put it in the show notes for folks, because I think that
Thank you.
That framework that you referenced there, Michael, would be great for people to follow up and take a look at visually as well. So So what we've talked about today is, authentication, making sure that our emails are actually getting through and we're taking care of those table stakes, taking a deeper look at personalization, and then a more holistic look at measurement. I think all three of these are going to add some value to listeners, Michael. If anybody listening to this would like to follow up with you, ask any specific questions on some of the content you shared today, or learn more about what you and the team at Godfrey are up to, what's the best way for them to follow up with you, Michael?
Best way for me is at Michael J. Barber, pretty much everywhere online. And if you'd like to follow us on Twitter here at Godfrey, we're just at Godfrey B2B.
I love it. Thanks so much for being on the show, Michael. I really appreciate what you were sharing with listeners today.
Thanks, Logan. It was a pleasure.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.